A habitat pile is basically an accumulated pile of large debris, mostly woody debris as you can see here, but addition of some large herbaceous plants will also be beneficial, as it will put food for both mammals and birds in your habitat pile, giving them a better home. There are small birds that overwinter in this area, and during the coldest nights they will seek out places with cavities to get in and be insulated. These large branches will afford them such a place. And not only that, because of such a large pile with all these air pockets, it would be more insulated than if they had just like a cavity in a tree. Down lower, near the bottom, this is where your small mammals will go. Voles, shrews, moles. And if you put them beside a stump or something, or you had a very large piece on the bottom, then things like hares and rabbits can actually make their dens near the bottom, which is more beneficial than a lot of places that the snowshoe hares here make their dens, because they often make them underneath upturned trees. And in the spring, if we have a wet spring, their dens can get flooded and drown the baby rabbits. This section here, I had this piled quite high several times, and it has settled way down again. So underneath, there's a lot of humus building up, and instead of burning and releasing it all into the air, it just builds up in a pile, just like the moss in the bog, which is behind this pile here. This was an healthy forest 9 years ago. I used to come here and sit among the trees and meditate. After my 4-year absence, I came back, and as I traditionally did, I came out to Kane's Point to sit among the forest, and I found a forest that was dying. Some of them have green leaves high up, but when you look at the bark, you realize they don't have much life left. The ones with the green leaves, you see how much vegetation is underneath. Pretty much just moss. I needed dry wood. I heat my house with wood. And so I came here to cut the dead trees. Now, when you cut a dead tree, even though the tree itself has no life, it is habitat for somebody. Namely insects, which in turn is food for many kinds of birds and small mammals. when the tree gets cavities in it, then there are birds that make their nest in said tree. So after cutting down a dead tree, I think, okay, so how do I return some of this habitat that I just removed? The solution was to pile up the branches. And there's a little pile I've started right there. This was a tree that was already down, and I've got it partially cut up. Another thing about selectively cutting wood out of a forest, you've seen the moss covered ground in the deep forest. Last year, less than a year ago now, that's what this place looked like. Just moss with standing dead trees. So I cut down the trees, I make my piles, and the seeds that were sitting there waiting get the light and they grow. This place is bursting forth with life now. There are some small seedling trees growing that couldn't grow before because it didn't get its light. There's even grasses coming up here. This place turned green very quickly. For those of us interested in carbon sequestering, when you harvest your firewood in a way that takes out the dead trees, the trees that are no longer a carbon sink, you let in light for the new plants to come forth, and since they are young plants, they are growing at their maximum rate and therefore taking in the maximum amount of carbon. It's amazing that this clearing here was once a deep, healthy forest. And like I say, it's about 9 years ago when I came back. So this is 2018. It'll be 3 years ago now. The trees had red needles still on them. The needles hadn't quite fallen off the branches yet. Here's one of the big piles. This used to be twice this height. They settle down oh so fast. But when I came back after the winter, there was a place, and right here you can see how an animal has made a little indentation. It could be a fox or something, to lay in against the brush pile. There was a larger such place over on the side there, with the brush pile to the one side. It offers quite a bit of insulation for a big animal on a cold night. But in through this, many voles. There wasn't a hole I thought a snowshoe hare was making, but I guess the settling down has prevented that. I don't see it now. This pile over here, it was so high I had to throw the branches fairly strongly to get them up on top. And now it's just this 4-foot high pile, and it was at least 9 feet high. So once again, the area where I took out the dead trees, bursting with life, some taller vegetation, berry plants. This is going to be a lot of berries for birds and voles and squirrels. You can hear the squirrels chattering away at me there now. Squirrel was using this one soon after I made it for a place to sit and eat his cones from the spruce trees. So this returns some of the habitat for the insects and creates more habitat for small mammals and the small birds during the winter, the overwintering small birds. And as I showed you on the other one, it also creates areas for larger mammals to snuggle up against in the cold winter nights. Of course, from my own perspective, now I can walk around. I don't have to worry about tripping over branches. It's an extra work, but having a nice clean area for your woodlot, it's like having a nice clean home. It's much better than trying to struggle through a mess. Clean up your home, keep it organized. My brother-in-law, when I was 9, my oldest sister got married, and we had gone to the store. I threw out the popsicle stick, which was wood, so biodegradable. And he said to me, "Is that all you think of your province?" And I thought, yeah, you know, even though it's biodegradable, you wouldn't just throw garbage around your house like that. We should keep our province clean and tidy. We should keep it healthy for both ourselves and the animals we share it with. Now here's the result of your typical smash and grab firewood collection. There's a cabin not 100 feet from here, and I have been discussing with the cabin owner because he was saying he didn't want the forest cut close to the cabins, which I was quite in agreement with. I'll zoom in. All that mass of young growth up there, that's where I was cutting out 2 large windfalls at the time, and I piled the branches. So a couple months later, I had been going to university at the time. I went to university, I come back to find this. And I'll show you another little glimpse just over right here. And here's more. Branches just taken off the trail here. So basically what's happened, the trees were cut down and the branches were left shading out the soil still, so nothing could grow. 12 years ago this was. And finally there are some things poking up through the massive branches that the guy left. Now we're going to walk just up here to the top of the hill. This is the one pile that's still visible here. This is where the two massive windfalls were. And I've got the branches piled there. And as you can see, all around it, there's a massive young growth of new trees growing. And when you're managing a forest, you want to keep your forest growing as fast as possible. For those of us interested in atmospheric carbon, there is no better a carbon sink or a carbon drawdown technology than fast growing plants, which is what you have here surrounding the habitat pile. Continuing to walk through what I call my woodlot proper. We have a very much a green trail with a thick growth of forest on either side of it. I've been harvesting here since the guy who down below done the clear cut smash and grab style firewood getting. And if you were to walk in through these trees, you would find a pile here and there where I piled up the branches from the trees. So think about it when you're selectively logging your woodlot and making habitat piles. What kind of forest would you rather see? This or this? This or this? This is the first habitat pile I created. It is close to my vegetable garden. The core is branches from the fruit tree trimmings and the other trimmings that I was clearing out around section 1 on the property. And I covered it with sods from clearing out to put in the beds, permanent beds. The first thing I noticed next spring, meadow voles, they are active all winter and they make lines in the grass because they're running tunnels underneath the snow. And in the spring you find all these trails where the grass and everything green was eaten down to nothing because the meadow voles are running through trails. So after I created this habitat pile, the first thing I noticed was that the trails were missing. Yes, Mr. Rooster. And then later on the growing season, the meadow voles were also absent in the vegetable garden. They quite often previously chewed a little bit, not a lot, but they did chew on like tops of beets and carrots. You get some meadow vole damage. The next growing season there was none. I was out working around the garden one day and I hear this squeaking, and I follow the sound right over to this pile. There wasn't as much grass on it at the time, and a head pops out up top, a head popped out on one side, a head on another side, a head down by my feet. I said, well, I've made meadow vole tell. So apparently I made them a home, and whether they're eating what I placed in this habitat pile or not, I don't know. And I'm thinking they could probably store during the summer some feed in the pile, and so they were not running around as hungry all the time, and during the winter they didn't run so much under the snow. This is the habitat pile that I'm making in section 2. When you're cleaning up an area, you don't have to take all the debris and burn it, releasing a lot of the carbon and creating extra pollution that benefits no one really. Instead, it's a way of looking at a brush pile that it's actually habitat for many different species. For my benefit, as I clean up the forest here, and the food forest area that's going to be started behind me, I can just pile it right there. It's easily accessible and beneficial.